Hey everyone, Kevin here, and welcome back to my channel. So last week, President Trump began to make good on a campaign promise to dismantle the Department of Education. Now, this has been covered by a wide array of news networks and other channels at this point, but I wanted to comment on it as soon as I could because most people discussing it have never been teachers and are lay people, politicians, or union officials. I've already covered a lot of my thoughts on this topic when I talked about Trump's 10-point education plan before he was reelected, and I highly recommend checking that out because it's my longest video ever, and I reacted to all of those points in real time, including the entire concept of shutting down the DOE. But campaign ideas are one thing, while actually enacting them is another, and what has actually happened is what I want to talk about today. Basically, the Department of Education laid off half of its workforce under Trump's orders and under the recommendations of the Department of Governmental Efficiency, or DOGE, which wasn't even conceived of until just recently. Over 1,300 people are going to lose their jobs when the layoffs take effect 90 days from the notice, and must work from home until then to supposedly protect the remaining employees as if they're worried about retaliation or something. In the meantime, many satellite locations are also planned to be shuttered, such as the DOE offices in San Francisco and New York, plus the plan to consolidate their office space in Washington, D.C. itself from three buildings down to one. Education Secretary Linda McMahon has said that these are the first steps to close the agency entirely, as Trump wants to do, even though it would take an act of Congress to accomplish that, since Trump doesn't have the exclusive power to end a cabinet agency. He can gut it as he clearly has been doing, though, but he can't get rid of it. But let's get down to the heart of the conversation. From an ordinary teacher's perspective, how much of this is going to change what your local school does for your children on a daily basis? And honestly, not that much, really. And the shuttering of the DOE won't be as catastrophic as it sounds or as everyone's making it out to be. And no, I'm not saying I agree with getting rid of it, but the department's role has been grossly overstated in education, and to give credit where it's due, as I said in that video I mentioned, the DOE is bloated to high heaven, and reducing some of the workforce is probably a good thing on the surface. Education, all the way down to the local level, is so administrative and top heavy that it's why nothing ever really gets done in education. It's why we always operate 10 to 15 years behind the times and where we should be. Its funding always gets misused and shoveled into pet projects instead of where it would be best suited for students and teachers. Oh, and speaking of funding, remember that every state has its own Department of Education too. We're just talking about the one at the federal level, which only barely provides 10% of general education funding. In some states, it can go as high as 20%, like here in California or in New York at times, but rarely does it go higher than that 10%. Heck, before COVID, it was at best 5% of school funding. People don't realize that the vast majority of education money comes from the state and the local levels, not the federal level. So, like I said, you'll actually feel far less of this change than you think. And I'm all for cutting out inefficiencies in the public school system because there are way too many and there's too much red tape getting in the way of what teachers and students actually need to succeed. But is dismantling the Department of Education a good idea? Well, no, not really. Just because there are issues with something doesn't mean getting rid of it is the answer. The DOE needs reformation, not destruction. You know what a lot of that 10 or so percent does, in fact, fund? Programs for special education students, those with disabilities, and other disadvantaged kids who can't afford basic supplies and who don't have easy access to the curriculum. Special education is a growing part of our schools these days, and there are never enough special ed teachers to cover all of those students, thus causing those that remain to be incredibly overworked by their insanely heavy caseloads. The DOE entirely administers the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, or IDEA, after all, and ensures all kids have access to the same education as anyone else. Add on top of that, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, particularly the Title I program that most people are familiar with, is what authorizes aid to disadvantaged students, and is the primary source of federal aid to elementary and secondary education, as stated in a congressional research report. These programs are in actual jeopardy of losing their funding, or at least having it administered by another federal agency who may not understand how to do that effectively because they've never done so, and only the DOE has for generations at this point. But on the other hand, what else does the DOE do funding wise? Oh, yeah, they oversee student loan programs, which admittedly have become incredibly abused and have left so many young people with crippling debt they can't pay off until their 70s. I think our student loan system is incredibly exploitative, and the department actually does need to answer for that. And you know what else? The DOE has absolutely no method by which to track financial mismanagement either. There is literally no existing system that tracks where funding goes or how it is used, and that's how we end up with the COVID funds being incredibly mismanaged by school districts to the point that they modeled their entire funding pyramid around them. And when that funding dried up, you saw schools begin to lay off teachers because they idiotically planned their budgets around emergency funds. So on this point, I think we can all agree that perhaps Doge actually has a reason to exist and meddle a little in education. Like I said, we're top heavy, and funding is constantly misused on things that don't benefit teachers, students, or parents. Isn't that what the Department of Governmental Efficiency is supposed to handle after all? But I'd be remiss if I didn't remind you that the Department of Education does handle a lot of things, and any negative fallout from slashing its workforce will result in reduced student outcomes at the other end, like Becky Pringle, the president of the National Education Association, pointed out in a recent interview. And as I said in that other video as well, there is a lot of disinformation about what the DOE does on a daily basis when it comes to grants and other resources, which very well may be put in awkward places as a result of these layoffs. Many senior government officials have claimed that no federal student aid programs will be impacted by the cuts. But I think that's probably just wishful thinking until I see the dust settle down a bit, and there's certainly a lot of it in the air right now. So I'm conflicted. I think that the DOE needs serious reform, and getting rid of some legacy people who've become complacent in their roles is probably needed. But it's not just those people. 63 new probationary employees were among these layoffs, and removing fresh talent is probably a mistake in the grand scheme of things, since they're the ones who are going to have the new ideas that you're looking for. But with everything that it actually does, abolishing the DOE is not the solution. They still do a lot of important things, even when it is comparatively less than what states or local agencies do. So getting rid of it entirely is just not a realistic notion. Education is built upon a tower of band-aids. How about we pull them off and fix the underlying problems rather than continuing to treat symptoms? Yes, some of that involves throwing out the old, but not all of it. Well, guys, thanks for watching. If you could take a moment to click like and subscribe, along with hitting the bell button to stay up to date with all of my content, that'd be greatly appreciated. But for now, I've been Kevin, and I will see you in the next video.